Pastor Bill Quinn of Love Never Fails, heard daily on Bible School Radio, 91.3 KDKR Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC Commerce.
Portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, is Congress going to abolish the IRS? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, is the IRS at risk of being abolished? Today, IRS expert and Prudent Money contributor Dan Pilla is here to weigh in. Hey, Dan, how's it going today?
It's going well, Bob. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. You know, you and I trade articles for every once in a while, and you sent me one last week, and I never thought I would see this at the top of an article, and it talked about the Republicans to vote on a bill to abolish the IRS. You know, talk about this Fair Tax Act and really what's going on.
Well, yeah, the fair tax, Bob, is a concept that's been around for a long time. It actually was introduced into Congress originally in the late 1990s, probably 99 or maybe even 2000 was the very first time the bill was introduced. But I actually wrote the legislative model for the fair tax concept 10 years earlier than that. Well, not quite, about 8 years earlier than that. And the idea, Bob, is to abolish the Internal Revenue Service and the income tax and replace the income tax with a comprehensive retail sales tax. The plan that I wrote would take all five taxes that exist at the federal level, the five major taxes that exist at the federal level, which are the personal and corporate income tax, the estate and gift tax, the Social Security tax, the tax not the benefit program, and then the unemployment tax. Those five taxes collect literally about 98.5% of all federal revenue. And so the plan would abolish those five taxes and replace them with a comprehensive retail sales tax. And so the idea is that a retail sales tax is much simpler, it's more fair, it's far more efficient to administer than the current income tax is ever and could ever hope to be. In fact, the current tax system is the most inefficient thing that we possibly have when it comes to enforcement and administration, and it's more complicated than anybody can imagine when we consider that it's built on 4 million words, more than 4 million words that have been changed more than 6,000 times just since 2001 alone. So that the current system we have is neither fair nor simple nor efficient, and everybody knows it. And so replacing it with a comprehensive retail sales tax on consumption goods and services is far simpler to comply with, and it's far easier to understand, and it's far more efficient. And so that is the concept behind the law here that's floating around right now.
So let's talk a little bit about the process. I'm sure there's a lot of different ways that you could go through the process of collecting the tax. Is that something that you would pay as you go, or what's the best process for this?
Well, yeah, everybody knows how a sales tax works, Bob, and it's a tax that's paid on the retail price of consumption goods and services at the point of purchase. So you go into the store and you buy $100 worth of items, you pay the tax at the checkout counter right there at that time. So as far as an individual is concerned, as far as a non-business taxpayer is concerned, which by the way is about 85% of all of the taxpayers in America are wage earners, right? And so they would pay all their taxes at the point of purchase and would never have to file another tax return again. And so not only would they not be required to file a tax return, they wouldn't be required to keep any records to prove that they didn't have to file a tax return. They wouldn't be subject to any IRS enforcement action, no letters, no notices, no audits, no collection action, no levies, liens, seizures, none of that stuff. All of it would be gone. 100% of that enforcement action and compliance activity and compliance costs, by the way, to people would be gone for 85% of Americans. Now, as to the businesses that are concerned, the retail businesses would be required to collect the sales tax. But, Bob, we already have retail sales taxes that businesses comply with at the state level. I think 45 or 46 of the states out there have a state sales tax, and so the idea is that you make the federal sales tax collectible by the states. All right. So what happens is the merchant collects the federal tax, piggyback with the state tax, pays the revenue to the states. The states then are responsible to pay it in to the Internal Revenue Service. And so what that does in terms of efficiency is remarkable. Think about this for a minute. Right now at the federal level, there are about 260 million, closer to 270 million tax returns that are filed. These are business tax returns and personal tax returns. About 160 million personal, and the rest are business tax returns. These are filed every year, Bob. Every single year, this number of tax returns gets filed, and as a matter of fact, the returns increase in number every year by a couple of million. All right, so now we've got collection points at the federal level that consist of 260 million collection points. That is the number of individual places that the IRS has to go to get the money, right? Now, if we go to a retail sales tax that's collectible by the states and payable by the states to the Treasury Department, we've reduced the collection points to just 50. Not 50 million, just 50, which of course is the number of states in the union. And so the Treasury would have its claim to the revenue would be directed to the states, not to individual business taxpayers. All right, so now not only do we have tremendous relief for non-business taxpayers, but we got relief for business taxpayers as well, because they don't have to worry about IRS audits and collection and the rest of that stuff. Obviously, they've got concerns for state sales tax audits, no doubt about that. But the fact of the matter is that they're facing those challenges already anyway. And the truth of the matter is, Bob, is it's far easier to comply with sales tax laws than it is income tax laws. And here's the other relief for businesses. Even if you would argue that the Treasury Department should have a direct right or power to audit business sales tax payments, okay, maybe I'll grant you that. But the fact of the matter is, even in that situation, the business tax compliance becomes remarkably easier, and the reason is because virtually all of the tax revenue that's paid, well, I shouldn't say that. Let me rephrase that and say about 65%, roughly two-thirds of all the tax revenue that's paid into the Treasury is paid by businesses through wage withholding, Bob. And all of that would be eliminated. The need to do all of that withholding and all of that accounting and all of the filing of the 941s and the 940 forms and the W-2s and W-3s and 1099s and all of the rest of that stuff that businesses have to cope with, all of that would be gone under a comprehensive sales tax law. So it is remarkably easier to comply, it is remarkably simpler, and it is very, very efficient from the standpoint of enforcement and administration.
So has this been voted at the House level yet?
I haven't seen any evidence that there's actually been a vote on it. I don't believe there's been a vote yet, but McCarthy is going to bring it to the floor of the House for a vote, so there will be a full House vote on this bill. That was apparently part of the deal that he made with the right wing of the Republican Party. Right, that they wanted this bill put on the floor, and so he did that in exchange for he agreed to that in exchange for getting their vote for his leadership of the House. So it's going to come to a vote, Bob, and it'll probably pass the House. I'm guessing that it will, and it's going to be a ceremonial vote because the fact is it's not going anywhere in the Senate.
So does that mean that they're making progress, or it's just politics as usual?
Well, I think it's politics as usual. Because the sad reality is that when the Republicans have control and can actually make something happen, they don't do it. The first 2 years of President Trump's term, presidential term were such that an awful lot could have gotten done during that period of time from the standpoint of fundamental tax reform. Now there was a tax law that was passed, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which did cut taxes for about 80% of the people in America. This leftist claim that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was tax cuts for the rich is nonsense. It's demonstrably false. In fact, the top 20% of income earners either had their tax liability stay the same or go up under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the bottom 80% saw mostly tax cuts, and most of those cuts were for folks between the $40,000 to $80,000 income level. The vast majority of the cuts were right in that, what you might call the sweet spot of the middle class. And so, they got that done. Okay, that's fine. Of course, it's all being unraveled now by tax law changes that have taken place here in the last year or so. But why didn't they get the major reform done? And that's one of the concerns that I had at the time was we got to stop tinkering around the edges with tax reform. I've been in this business for more than 40 years, Bob, and every time they say "quote unquote" tax simplification, really they're making it more complicated. And just for context, in 2001, the tax code consisted of about 1.3 million words. All right, well, here we are, 2023, after year after year after year of tax simplification. Now our tax code is over 4 million words in length. I mean, what is that's not simplification. I mean, we've gotten to the point where the thing is so broad, it's incapable of being read, and it's so complicated that it's incapable of being understood.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. If you want more information on Dan or want to look up how to deal with the IRS, if there's a problem, he has written a book about it. TaxHelpOnline.com. I think he's at, I'm going to take a wild stab at it, I always do, about 16 books, Dan?
Yeah, I think 15, Bob.
Okay, 15.
TaxHelpOnline.com. They're not all in print anymore, but of course the more recent ones are.
Well, hey, Dan, we're up against a break. Everybody stick around. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Bob Brooks, host of the Prudent Money Radio Show. 2020 started the period of COVID. 2021 started the period of inflation. 2022 started the bear market in stocks and bonds. What happens in 2023? Well, I have no crystal ball. However, I do have countless hours of research and opinions to draw from that can give us an idea of the road ahead. On Wednesday, February 1st, we are going to take 50 minutes to talk about what could take place in 2023 when it comes to the following areas. Will inflation go higher or go away for good? Is the real estate market about to crash? Are we heading for a recession? Is the bear market in bonds and stocks about over or just getting started? What is the best place to keep cash and emergency money? What could be the best kept secret of the investment world during the next rebound? What steps do you take in 2023 to not only be safe but also grow your money? Tough questions, real answers. Let's have a discussion. On Wednesday, February 1st at 12 p.m., join me in a live Zoom presentation where we discuss what you need to know to be profitable in 2023. For more information and where to sign up, just go to prudentmoney.com.
This is Rob Randall, your host and teacher of the Invisible War radio program. The Invisible War is the study of God's Word on how to walk in Christ's victory in the spiritual battles we face against the powers of darkness. Join me every Sunday morning at 9 right here on KDKR and KYJC in Commerce, your station for life.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson with the Point of View Radio Talk Show. I want to invite you to listen to our program on KDKR from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. Monday through Friday. We look at various issues from a biblical perspective. Our topics range from politics and economics to the Bible, theology, and apologetics. We also bring authors and informed experts to the program. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. Hope you'll join us every day on Point of View right here on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Dan Pilla's with me today to talk a little bit about what's going on with the IRS. So tell me this, Dan, the you're talking about a sales tax model. What about the flat tax model? Which one do you prefer, and which one would really realistically have the best chance of ever getting through if it ever happened?
Well, those are two completely different questions. Let me address the second one first. The one that would have a far better chance of getting through is the flat tax, but even that is just completely unacceptable to the left because a flat tax doesn't have a graduated income tax scale. By its very nature, it's got one tax rate as opposed to the 7 tax rates that we have in existence right now. And the left would argue vociferously, Bob, that you must have a graduated income tax, which of course is a Marxist idea. The whole idea of a graduated income tax is not economically sound. It's based on Marxist principles of transfer of wealth from individuals to government. That's the whole purpose of a graduated income tax. But the flat tax is easy to understand. It makes sense to people. It is not a radical move in the sense of abolishing the IRS and the income tax, right? It's just more tinkering around the edges. Although it's not, in all fairness, it would be more than just tinkering. So the flat tax would have a better chance of getting passed. As to which one is a better idea, there's no doubt in my mind that the sales tax is a better idea because a flat tax is still an income tax, Bob. And that means that individuals still have to file tax returns. They still have to be responsible to the IRS. They still have to keep records. They're still subject to audits and collection. The vast majority of businesses out there still have the problem of the withholding of taxes from their workers' paychecks, right? So they still have to do the withholding. They have to do the regular monthly or even more frequently reports to the IRS. They still have to file the quarterly tax returns. They still have to do all the W-2s and 1099s. All of that stuff doesn't go away. Not a bit of that goes away. And to put this in perspective, last year, businesses filed, get this number now, Bob, 4.3 billion information returns, W-2s and 1099s that were filed with the IRS. All of those were filed by businesses. None of that stuff goes away under a flat tax. None of it does. And this is what people don't understand about a flat tax system. People can still be audited. The IRS can still audit you. They can still drag you in there. They can still require you to produce your records. And when I say that, folks say, well, Dan, what's there to audit if it's a flat tax? Well, they audit income. Yeah, the IRS, and this is particularly true of businesses. The IRS is completely convinced, Bob, that small businesses in America are cheating on their tax returns, not by overstating deductions, but by not reporting their income. And even low-income taxpayers are subject to audit. One of the most commonly audited tax returns in America, Bob, are low-income tax returns. That's income under $35,000 a year because of the tax credits that are claimed on the return. Not tax deductions, tax credits, and in particular, the earned income tax credit. In fact, the Treasury Inspector for Tax Administration and the Government Accountability Office note that the earned income tax credit is one of the largest sources of tax fraud in America. And so the IRS is still going to audit all of these flat tax returns to the extent that there's any credits that are allowed against the tax, which, you go to a flat tax, you eliminate deductions, but the credits are still there mostly, or at least they could be. I mean, theoretically they could be. And so this is why I believe that the income tax is a bad idea all the way around. It's a bad idea. And my challenge is this. I believe that you cannot have freedom and an income tax coexisting in the same society. One necessarily drives out the other. And we see freedom being eliminated under the income tax concept with the reach of the IRS growing daily. Every single day they're getting more and more power and more reach in terms of information reporting and their ability to access people's records and data, and of course with the goal of seizing their income and assets, which is what the premise is all about. And so my challenge to listeners is this: which one are you willing to learn to live without? You willing to learn to live without the income tax or freedom? Which one? Take your pick.
Let's go with the assumption that that politicians forever will just dance around the edges and not really do something about the system. But let's say that, what would it take for Republicans, for the entire Congress to get behind really making a positive change in the IRS, to overall the system? And what would that look like, do you think?
Well, that's a good question, and I've been struggling with that I answered that question upwards of 20 years ago when I got really frustrated with the process of pushing the sales tax back in the 1990s. I was very, very active about doing it in the 1990s, and I finally came to the conclusion that Congress was never going to do the right thing for the right reason. They might stumble on to doing the right thing, but never for the right reason. And what the conclusion I came to at that time, Bob, is now coming to fruition today. The conclusion that I came to is that Congress was never going to seriously talk about abolishing the income tax and the Internal Revenue Service and rebuilding the system until the IRS collapsed under its own weight. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening today. Mm-hmm. We've got the IRS backlogged still, Bob, backlogged more than 15 million documents, income tax returns, corporate personal income tax returns, and over 5 million pieces of mail, correspondence from taxpayers to the IRS about this problem or that problem. The IRS is overwhelmed. They can't do the job that they're supposed to be doing. We've seen this repeatedly for the last 5 or 6 years, and not just COVID related. COVID made a big problem, no doubt about that, with the shutdown of the IRS during the 3-4 months in 2020, and that was a huge problem, no doubt. But this was building before that, and they simply do not have the resources or the manpower to do the job that they're supposed to do, and they will never get them, even with the $80 billion that was given under the Inflation Adjustment Act and the 87,000 more IRS employees that they're going to be hiring over the next 10 years. They're never going to have the resources to be able to do the things they think they need to do to fully enforce this tax law, because the key problem here is they're taxing income. And in order for them to fully enforce the tax law, they have to know everything about your life. Where did you go? When did you go there? What did you do? What did you earn? Where did you spend it? Who did you spend it with? What did you spend it on? They need to know every single aspect of every person's private life in order to enforce that law. And there's not enough resources on the planet to give them the power to do that, Bob.
So in one of your last National Review articles, you wrote a real nice synopsis of the history of the IRS. And you said in that article that that the IRS made sense back in the 50s and 60s, if I read this right. Where in history did it take a turn for the worse, ending up in its current shape? What made sense in the 50s and 60s was their attitude about enforcement and education. You know, it was a much simpler law at that time, much easier to comply with, and it wasn't until the 1970s that the tax code really started to explode in size. And then, of course, I gave you that brief history starting in 2001, when the increases to the code just blew up, and so now you had this friction between enforcement and education. Enforcement and education. Do we enforce the tax laws by grinding people into powder when they don't comply, or do we educate citizens on the front end to allow them to comply? And my position has been consistent for 35 years, and that is they have to help people comply, not grind them into dust when they don't comply. That has got to be the focus of the agency, and it hasn't. I mean, that pendulum is swung back and forth, and it's on the enforcement side of the ledger right now. When you look at the $80 billion appropriation, Bob, $46 billion of that money, $46 billion of the 80 is pointed straight at enforcement, and another $25 billion is pointed at enforcement support. All right, so what is that? 70 of the $80 billion is all pointed at enforcement, even though the IRS only collects 2% of total federal revenue through enforcement action. Well, there's something wrong with this picture here. You got to be spending the money on education, assistance, and taxpayer outreach to teach people to comply and not grind them into dust when they don't. Once again, Dan's website is taxhelponline.com. You said so. You were saying something before I would cut you off at the break. What were you talking about? Some of your books.
Oh, I was just going to say, Bob, that that not all the books are in print anymore. But if you go to my website, taxhelponline.com, you purchase any book at any price point. Doesn't make any difference how much it is. You get a free 15-minute consultation with me personally, so you get a chance to read the book, write your questions down, and then get your questions answered by me personally.
Okay, and one last thing. You'll be on again next month, God willing, and I expect you to have solved all these problems. But then again, what would we have to talk about? So that's one of the good things, I guess, about having all this going on.
Yeah, there's always something to talk about when it comes to the IRS, that's for sure.
Well, Dan, always good talking to you. We will talk to you next month. God bless.
All right, Bob. Thanks. Bye.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Love talking to Dan, love his passion, and been doing radio with him for over 20 years. And he used to do a lot. He was real active in Congress and congressional testimonies back in the day. So interesting viewpoints that he's got. This is Bob Brooks. If you have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.